Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War Frontline update for the 9th of September 2024. And if you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the screen at the moment, pause the video. We're going to obviously go to my map, but we're going to look a little bit at the ATP distilled, the Benny Pie website, well, my website that Ben has done for me so kindly, that breaks down all my videos and gives the AI summaries of everything I say. If you don't have the ability to watch my videos, you can always read a sort of distilled transcription of each of them. We're going to go to part of the website that has the ISW, Institute for the Study of War, daily report. This is one for the most recent one from last night, that is distilled even further to its key components. Now, there's a few things I wanted to pick up from here. One was, despite these efforts, some mill bloggers remain critical of the Kremlin. So mill bloggers, how we get our information about what's going on in the war. I have my own curated list of sources, and there are some Russian sources that are really useful to dip into. And some of them have been getting into trouble. Well, it's been the case throughout the war that certain mill bloggers have got into trouble. You've had Igor Strelkov, or Evil Gherkin, who has been arrested and put in prison for being critical. Russian mill bloggers have revealed the Kremlin's strategy of co-opting influential mill bloggers to control the information landscape within Russia using a combination of rewards and implicit threats. That's out there now. Despite these efforts, some mill bloggers remain critical of the Kremlin, indicating that the government's control over the information space is not absolute. Prominent mill blogger Alexander Sladkov revealed that he faced a criminal case for criticizing the Russian military, but the case was dropped after intervention by the presidential administration, suggesting that Putin prefers co-opting rather than silencing critical voices. So there are critical voices that are allowed to remain somewhat critical. Another mill blogger posted videos claiming that traitors are sitting in the Kremlin. That was the 13th, but he later retracted the videos, likely due to fear of repercussions, highlighting the Kremlin's success in encouraging self-censorship among mill bloggers. A Russian mill blogger and former Storm Z unit instructor has criticized the training of drone unit commanders, highlighting their lack of understanding of drone technology and tactics, leading to unnecessary losses. So those are a few interesting ones. Now, talking about mill bloggers, I guess, in a sense, one of the mappers that I use to synthesize my map is Syriac maps, and they appear to be very much in the Russian sphere of influence. And so it's worth reminding ourselves that they will be making the claims they do in the context of possibly having pressure from the Kremlin or from Russian handlers or something. I don't know. Or they could just be a random mapper. I think someone was saying that they, I think it was JR, I think, was saying that he thinks that they might be based in Spain due to a couple of hints here and there from their threads. But certainly pro-Russian. It's been mapping the Syrian war previously. It has loads of maps going on their handle on Twitter, linked to from there. But yeah, so always take everyone's claims with a pinch of salt. I really think Andrew Perpetua is a very honest and as objective as you're going to be, given that he has a very pro-Ukrainian moral stance and political stance, but he is brutally honest when he needs to be. Right, the Kursk region, as you can see, is a bit of a smorgasbord of different coloured pins. So we have some moves, some gains for the Russians in the Koronovo area. This is interesting. This was probably the largest settlement that Ukraine have tried to get a control of, given that they have moved through a few places. Sudja is fairly large over here, but that is definitely, well, if you take the larger conurbation sort of area, the larger urban area of Sudja, actually that is really fairly significant. But Koronovo is an individual place, although the larger urban areas and maybe as big as Sudja, individually Koronovo was a significant town. And the Russians have stopped, I think, Ukraine from being able to either flank that from the north and south and also take it head on, and have actually pushed the Ukrainians back. Now, remember, the Russians will be putting supposedly 60,000 troops into these areas to stop the Ukrainians from advancing. And also remember that if the Ukrainians make no further gains in the whole of the Kursk area, that the Russians stop them, then that is in itself a success. The fact that, or if that is indeed true, if 60,000 troops are there, That's Ukraine succeeding in doing what they wanted with Kursk. It's not so much about taking the land for the sake of the land. The land becomes a token of exchange, right? It becomes a currency. It has, yet there are some even possibly operational advantages, maybe even strategic, if you're talking about getting hold of information about how the rail networks work and etc., but certainly operational advantages to having certain areas under their control, the Ukrainians. But really, it's about exchanging territory, and it's about drawing troops, and the PR thing as well. So drawing those troops to here and forcing those Russian troops to stop the Ukrainian advances is a success. So the Ukrainians being stopped shouldn't be seen as in a negative light. It's what was expected at some point. Right, okay. There are some gains, as according to Syriac maps, in the area of Neidanov here. That settlement has come under the control as moving towards Kamishevka. Now, this happened a couple of days ago. I reported that in my last update, and I haven't done an update for what is it, 3 days now. So bear in mind that all of these movements on the map are 3 days worth of moves. So it's not the last 24 hours where this has all happened. Now, Syriac maps has a tendency, as I keep saying, to be very quick when the Russians make gains and make claims to those gains. Listen to the MOD and say, right, the Russians are here, or we've seen a video of a Russian vehicle here, even though it gets blown up and they will get killed. The Russians control that land. But when the Ukrainians make those similar sort of moves, or even, are verifiably further forward, takes Syriac map a little bit longer to update that. So this was already mapped by Andrew Perpetua and Null reports a few days previously, so that's more like a catch up there. And the Russians making some gains just north of Cherkasskoye, Perechtnoye there, a little bit further to the southeast of that previous settlement. So a bit of push and shove, and then as we come down to the further to the south here, not quite as far. Sorry, I'm going off on one here. This is around Borky, isn't it? Where the Ukrainians are pushing further to the east. Yeah, so they've taken control of Spalnoye here, just to the east of Borky. So that is quite an area, according to Syriac maps, that the Russians have now ceded. Although Andrew Perpetua had a similar mapping previously anyway, so this could just be a set of catching up for Syriac maps. But let's now look at some of the claims. So we have the daily report here from Null reports regarding what's going on in Kursk. And when the incursion or the invasion first started, they were very long, loads of things happening. Now we're only getting maybe one territorial tweet a day and few bits and pieces. Usually the threads are only sort of 5 or 6 tweets long, which gives you an indication of how things have become much more positional in the area. In fact, Null report says, is Russia preparing a counterattack? According to Russian channels, Russia is preparing a counterattack in the Kursk region, aiming to restore all lost territory in recent weeks. So we'll see if that happens over the next few days. Now, there's a lot of information coming out. Here's a video of a dash cam of someone driving, or maybe their mobile phone, and an airburst or a fragmentation shell, maybe a HIMARS rocket, is hitting a bridge just ahead, and he stops and reverses. There's a lot of bridge talk today. Also, video footage of JDAM strike on a bridge. So that's a huge old explosion there. Direct hit on a bridge. Good, accurate hit there. As I say, bridges seem to be very much on the agenda for the Ukrainians still, and that would indicate that they are planning still to move further to the west into this area south of the same river. Around these bridges, I think it's another bridge around Karij that's been hit. So a permanent bridge was hit there, permanent bridge in Zvanoye and in Glushkovo. And then we've had these pontoon bridges popping up and getting destroyed in a kind of extended game of whack-a-mole. Andrew Perpetuus said this morning that the number of bombs Russia is dropping in Kursk is insanity. You see a bomb fall, drone zooms out, there are 5 more, drone pans to the left, 8 more, pans to the right, 12 more. Quote, in the Kursk direction, the Russians, this is from a Ukrainian source, have a completely different approach to counter-battery. Their artillery is still not spread out in that direction, so they just F with CABs, the guided glide bombs, and find the likely location of our artillery and throw CABs, and even more than one. Unfortunately, our stocks allow us to do this. I'm not quite sure that last sentence, but the idea is that, and some people are saying that maybe they're not advancing so quickly in Pokrovsk because they're actually using all their aviation and guided glide bombs to strike in Kursk. This is a real problem for the Ukrainians because they can't bring air defenses close enough to the border here, such as a Patriot system, because you bring a Patriot system here and then it's very, very vulnerable to just standard artillery or multiple launch rocket systems or whatnot. So you want to keep the Patriot somewhere back here. But if you keep it back here, then the Russians, it can't reach a Russian plane that is still able to drop a bomb at sort of a 70-kilometer range from the Kursk area. So where are we at there? So 242, so I need to change that quite considerably. Okay, so if you're talking about a 70-kilometer range, there we've got 89. So they can, if we take it to there, so they can fly near to Kursk city and drop all these bombs, and they will hit the Kursk region. That is where the Ukrainians are, with all sorts of guided glide bombs. Now, unfortunately, you know, if the Ukrainians want to hit them, they're going to have Patriots and whatnot, or decent air defense systems somewhere down here. And at 181 kilometers, it's just too far. It's too far to hit those planes, and so that's why those planes get away with doing what they do. And the only solution is to bring air defense systems up into, like, sort of medium range air defense systems up into this area. But of course, they will be prime targets for those guided glide bombs, for the Russian artillery, all sorts. So it is high risk to bring, you know, decent air defense systems in there to take out those planes. What you need to do, of course, is take out the air bases where those planes are flying from, and that is where we're at. The argument goes on, doesn't it? Okay, a few more bits on Kursk. Let's have a look at that. That is going to mean I am going to have to refresh my map. Oh well. Ukraine is advancing Kursk Oblast for the first time this month, is the claim here from Global War Monitor. That's actually going back a couple of days. That's Nadenov, that's a village I've already talked about, and taking 26 square kilometers, so fairly substantial there. Suryat Maps says of that settlement Spalnoye by Borky, that's the one over to the east of the salient, that the Ukrainian armies re-entered the locality of Spalnoye. Troops were entrenched since the days in the western outskirts. Clashes with the Russian army have taken place also on the outskirts of Cherkasskaya Konopelka. So that was that one that I said that the Russians have pushed back a little bit there. So a bit of push and shove, and then just lots of different bridge videos. And then this is this might be worth sort of looking at a little bit. This is a PT 91 Twadi, the Czech upgraded, I think, version T-72, isn't it? And another T-72 in Kursk. Looks like a Lancet hit them during a resupply procedure. So the Ukrainians will lose quite a bit of combat asset, you know, equipment in the Kursk region, because they are attacking. They're going to be bringing that offensive equipment there, and it will mean that they are, rather like I was talking about with the air defense systems, they are going to be vulnerable. Remember, the Kursk area is just one big cauldron now, effectively, where the Russians can sit on all sides of the salient and attack it with artillery, and then hammer it with guided glide bombs as well. So there you go. There it is, rendered properly now. Right, okay, moving on. Good old Google Earth. Right, moving on to the northeastern access from Kupiansk to Svatovo to Crimea. We can see that the Russians have made some gains in the Sinkivka area. Both mappers agreeing that, although there is some disagreement still, but agreeing that the Russians have made some further advances in that area. Andrew Perpetua largely catching up with what Surek maps had previously claimed, although some different sort of southeast of Sinkivka there. But yeah, that's a little bit worrying because they get closer and closer to Kupiansk when they do that. However, the benefit for the Ukrainians is this is largely higher ground over here, and so it's quite difficult for the Russians to make advances easily in this direction. But worrying nonetheless. Luckily, no change here to the Pischany area where the Russians have been moving towards the Oskil River. Just a few changes south of there where Surek maps has the Russians pushing a little bit further forward south of Novoselivska and north of Stelmakivka, so closing in that pocket of land that they still don't control there. Then when we come further to the south, the Russians have made a small gain along this gully. And the also have those, that's the wrong color, that's supposed to be red, so apologies for that, but made just a tiny gain there, a couple of fields worth of gains for the Russians. So having most of the rubber, the green there in the northeastern axis. If we look at, so what do I have here? Yeah, so this is actually the only thing I have, only source I have for this whole area is actually one concerning the Kharkiv offensives, where there is no movement to the mappers, but up in Vovchansk, just an imagery of how destroyed this place really is. And it's really heartbreaking to see the destruction, but also the continued destruction. So like I said, their planes seem to be active in that northern area, and they seem to be hammering Vovchansk still with bombs. But oh no, this is a Ukrainian use of bombs. So both sides have used aerial bombs. Obviously aerial bombs are aerial. Guided glide bombs a lot in this area. This is actually the use of the GBU-39 bombs from the Ukrainians, and they are hitting positions in Vovchansk. It's desperately sad that this town in just a matter of weeks has been well, now it's a long time since the incursion happened, or the invasion happened from the Russians' point of view, but within 3 weeks it was already hammered, and now it's just getting to kind of Bakhmut levels of destruction there. Absolutely hammered by both sides using their aviation there. But yeah, anyway, that could be a good indication that the Ukrainians are still trying to put pressure on the Russians. The Russians took troops and equipment out of this area to reinforce Kursk defensively. So it could be, I mean, we have seen some movement over here by Hliobike where the Ukrainians have pushed back the Russians a little bit there. And a couple of times there's been some small gains here, but it could be an area where the Ukrainians could capitalize. But they would probably need to apportion quite a bit of equipment and personnel to that area to do so. Now, these are genuinely areas of Ukrainian gain here, at least gain as far as Surek maps is concerned. So we're moving now down past Kremina to this area of the Seversk front line. So you've got the town of Seversk there. You've got the Kremina up here in the Serebyansky forest. And then Bakhmut down here with Chaziv Yar. Interestingly, no change to Chaziv Yar at the moment, so that's good news. But up here, Surek maps has shown a moving back of the Russian defensive lines just south of Ivana Darivka. Now, this is an area that Andrew Perpetua has routinely said is a large open space that is not populated with any settlements or houses or logistics, and actually it's just a big grey area. And what happened is sometime back, possibly Russians got into Ivana Darivka and hoisted a flag, or the flag might have been dropped by a drone. Don't quite know who the people were in the video, but that caused Surek maps to show, like, just in one day, just had all this area coloured in red to signify that the Russians had taken control of it all. And Andrew Perpetua's like, well, I'm not 100% sure of that. Like, what does it mean to control, like, hills here and hills there and a field over there? Like, is everyone standing like 10 meters apart, and you got like 100,000 people in this area to say we control that? No, it's likely it's just a big grey area. You have small groups attacking to Ivana Derivka, and then the other side attacking back, and then the other side, and actually it's just a big grey area. And that seems to be borne out by the fact that Surret Maps changes the lines around here fairly frequently, with a new bit of footage coming out to suggest that one side is actually here and the other side is not there, and then the other side is here. And rather than move the lines backwards and forwards, Andrew Perpetua just goes, right, it's a grey zone, and we'll move those lines when we've got really good consistent evidence that one side controls that rather than the other. But it is looking like this is a case of walking back overzealous claims previously. So that's Ivana Derivka area. So as mentioned, no change to Chasiv Yar, which is really good news. That's an area that has that used to be like the prime objective for the Russians. By the end of summer, they were looking at taking the whole of Chasiv Yar. They still haven't really got across the canal here. Andrew Perpetua disagrees with the claims that the Russians robustly control any of these areas, the other side of the canal. Surret Maps, on the other hand, does. And still this massive difference between the two mappers here in the Klishchivka area, with Surret Maps claiming the Russians just in one day pretty much, or relatively quickly, just suddenly took all of this land. There was always a bit of a difference between the mappers, and it depended on this, who they both disagreed with who controls this trench network on the hill above, or the ridge above Klishchivka. This is really the key to the whole area. And Surret Maps had Russia control that for ages, then they walked it back a little bit, and then suddenly they controlled it again, and then they suddenly controlled everything around here. And it's just a massive difference between the two mappers. Probably the single biggest inconsistency with the two mappers on the whole of the front line, I think, because of that trench network. I'd like to know what Andrew thinks about that trench network there. Right, then when we come down to the south, we get to Toretsk and New York, and there is a lot of talk about these areas because the Ukrainians have brought in forces to help defend here, and the Russians are also trying to make gains here. It's both this area and Pokrovsk that the Russians are really focusing on, without drawing their own troops away from here to defending Kursk. So this is more important. It's more important that they make more gains in the Pokrovsk and Toretsk areas than they concede territory in Kursk. It's a really interesting calculation, that one. Let's look at some of the sources. Defmon says the last few weeks, Ukraine has deployed units from at least 4 National Guards brigades in the Pokrovsk and New York sector to stabilise the front. As of now, it seems they've at least slowed down the Russian advances, and that's definitely true. There's been a bit of push and shove. They've taken some land back in places. Now, here, further advances claimed in New York. So what happened? So basically, and reporting from Ukraine did a video on this, not going to Tourette's, but some claims here from Surret Maps that the Russians have moved further into Tourette's, the main part of the city. So that's worrying if true. But it's this New York area that's really interesting. So Surret Maps has the Russians making significant gains in New York, back from what they might have lost recently, and a bit more on top. So now controlling all this area, supposedly. And that's quite a large area of change from 3 or 4 days ago. Now, other claims disagree somewhat, as in, okay, what happened originally? The Ukrainians were holed up. There was some Ukrainian troops holed up in this, is it chemical factory here? And there might be tunnels underneath, there might be bunkers underneath because it's Soviet era, and that's not unusual. They were surrounded. The Russians were hoping to kind of siege them in terms of ammunition and supplies, water and food. And the Azov Brigade, really experienced troops, then were tasked with breaking through here and getting to their own troops in this facility, and they appear to have done that and made a much larger corridor there, as according to Surat maps previously, but as you can see, maybe the Russians have regained some around the edges. But Andrew Perpetua has a very different interpretation. So we just get rid of Surat maps for a little while there. You can see that actually, as according to Andrew Perpetua, it's much more likely that some of these areas are grey zones, and yeah, the Ukrainians might well control that factory and larger areas both to the east and west there. So bringing back Surat maps, you can see that there's a really big difference between the mappers in this area as well. Now, okay, let's talk some more about this area. So, yeah, advances in New York claimed here. So that's to the west of the chemical factory there. This was from the 7th, though, so that's a couple of days ago. Claims that the Ukrainians had gained control of that area. And then we have, this is from today. So this is Knoll report saying defenders likely from the 12th Special Operations Brigade Azov, so these are special forces people, walking in the western part of New York. So here, you might wonder exactly when that was happening. I mean, look, they're walking with a dog there, with a spaniel by the looks of it. But anyway, there they are walking there, and that's been geolocated to this area, which is really significant. So this marks further Ukrainian advances on top of what was already known. Now, just to let you know, if you have a look at this, just to give you a sense of where we are here, you've got two triangles of sort of green and suburbia there, and we're talking just to the right of the apex of that right-hand triangle. So just to let you know where we're talking about there, as far as I can work out, we have these two triangles here. So I think that's that triangle and this triangle, and that is just to the right of the apex of that triangle. I may be wrong, but no, you've got the water feature there, which is a water feature there. So that's exactly where that is. Now that is what, 2 roads in, so that is there. That we have the Azov regiment walking quite calmly with a dog in this neighborhood. Now that is firmly under the control of the Russians, as according to both mappers. So it's going to be really interesting to see what the timestamp is for that video, if we know, but certainly it appears to be recent. You know, Azov have only just got there. You would imagine that these mappers, both mappers, are somewhat wrong here, you would have thought, if that is a correct geolocation for that, which it appears to be. Is it an old video? Someone says. I mean, that's it. There's some interesting points. There's no combat sound in the background, no gunfire, bombs, or anything else. They can walk freely with a dog by their side, no run and hide. It looks like a patrol in the second line. Both are good signs, if I'm right. So it's just really interesting. Quite right. Like there is no sound of gunfire in that. It just, yeah, what is going on? Was that filmed ages ago before New York was taken, and it's now fooling us? Or is this genuinely the Azov brigade patrolling deep in the Russian control zone? So who knows? I guess we'll find out at some point. Tea break. Right. We have Ukraine control map saying the weekend Ukraine map thread for Sunday the 8th of September. So this is yesterday. Highlights. Russian advances at Toretsk were marked. So this is the Russians making some extra gains into Toretsk, further to the north. Yeah, not that one. As Russian forces manage to advance further into the city, small Russian advances are marked in Pokrovsk and Seledovi directions, and we're going to get there in a minute. More widespread usage of the new Dragon thermite drones has been published by Ukraine, showing them front wide, and I reported that this morning, right up and down the front there, using those thermite dropping drones. Kursk isn't quite static, but movement has slowed down drastically, as we have already seen. Okay, what else from this direction? So Surat Maps says that the situation on Tourette's front during the last 5 days, the Russians made new advances east of the city and took control of the Tourette's Correctional Colony number 2. So this is going back up here and taking control of that correctional colony. Number 2, as you can see there, that is the claim from Surat Maps, and that if they do take control of places like that, that's going to be useful because they'll generally be well fortified and usually have slightly higher buildings that give you good line of sight, etc., etc. So, is, you know, for what would you call that, infrastructure like that is going to be useful for either side to take control of. So it'll be a shame that the Ukrainians had lost that, if that is indeed true. Right, now coming to the Pokrovsk front, we can see, first of all, a bit of a worry here that the Russians might have made some more advances towards Pokrovsk, because this has slowed down in the northwestern directions, particularly towards the T0504 highway near to Nova Alexandrivka. No change there for a good week or two, but a little bit of a change here towards Pokrovsk, but that could be catching up with what Surat Maps had already claimed, so that might not be from the last 24 hours. It's just a case of evidence has come to suggest that the Russians have advanced there. And indeed, there is talk about Hradivka being largely under Russian control or under an awful lot of pressure, and both mappers would agree with that. So there is that. Then we come further to the south, we can see that the Russians are, as according to Surat Maps, making gains in Seledove again. So they were pushed out of Seledove, and now they appear to be, they had taken control over maybe 40% of it. That's Surat Maps though, so take that with a pinch of salt. And they appear to have been pushed back and now taking some of that ground back again. Again, as according to Surat Maps, no change from Andrew Perpetua's map in the area. So if we go to Surat Maps, they say that, I don't know if we've got the, no, actually they don't, there isn't detail of that. It might be something that they will produce later. What else? What other sources for the area do we have? So War Translator says both Russian and Ukrainian sources have confirmed further advances in Nivelska, which is now under Russian control. Following the fall of Krasnohorivka, there's an increased risk of the defense forces being encircled in a pocket. Right, so this is worrying. As we come further to the south, and we can see that the Russians are making some gains around Ukrainsk, just to the south of there. This kind of area, thin part of the settlement here, further control there for the Russians, as according to Surat Maps, and also into the southern outskirts of Ukrainsk. So that is worrying. But what a lot of people are talking about is this pocket around here. So if you remember some time back, I mean, we're talking the days of Pervomaisky, aren't we? Pobieda. So Nivelska should be, there's so much going on now, I can't even locate Pervomaisky. And so we have the Avdiivka. Yeah, here we are. So this is Avdiivka. I need to get the May the 30th lines back up. It's interesting. I didn't realize how much of a marker they were for me. So this gives you the idea where the lines were for the Ukrainians back, or for the Russian defensive line back in May of last year, May the 30th last year. And you had this area coming out here. You had Pervomaisky, and then south of Pervomaisky you had Nivelska, which is a small settlement, agricultural settlement that held out for so long and stopped the Russians from moving further on. And around here there were lots of fortifications in both the tree lines, but also other fortifications and trench networks. I mean, you can see some of the trenches there, and this might be old footage as well, so they'll be far more extensive since then. That's probably sort of 2018 imagery might be in that area. It depends where you are on the map as to how recent the imagery is. This Nivelska area was really good for the Ukrainians. They did a fabulous job of holding out there, but it looks like that is well and truly in control of the Russians now. And as you can see from Andrew Perpetua, huge gains here. Again, this is sort of 4 days or so, or 3 days maybe, of gains since my last mapping update, but a large area of control there for the Russians. And likewise for Surat Maps further to the south here, actually to the north of Krasnohorivka. So this is Krasnohorivka that was taken, and now they appear to be largely in control of the very northwestern outskirts of Krasnohorivka there. So what this then does is creates this whole pocket of Ukrainian troops. Don't know how many are there, what kind of fortifications are there. There's a lot of rural area, but they will be dug in these areas, and the problem could be that you're looking at having quite a few Ukrainians cut off if they can join these two. It's still quite a large opening to that, but it is a worrying set of gains by the Russians here, and I would imagine that really that's going to be ceded to the Russians. There's no point of the Ukrainians staying in there, and that will mean that the Russians will actually take quite a considerable amount of land unless the Ukrainians are going to really try and fight back. But of course, where are you getting those troops from? Are you willing to attrit your troops in some pretty hard battling there? So anyway, threat of being encircled. Defmon says, update from deep state maps is, I would be surprised if the Ukrainians aren't pulling out of Novelska salient by now. That might be what we are seeing here. So talking about those gains by the Russians, both up there by Novelska and down here by Krasnohorivka, also gains around here supposedly as well. So pulling out of that salient could be what the Ukrainians will be doing right now, and we might see that whole area go to Russian control fairly soon. Okay, then when we come out of there, just some small gains along the road here, as according to Andrew Perpetua, he has Vodyany fully under the control of the Russians, which is interesting because Syriac Maps doesn't. And I think this was a claim by the Russian MOD that they control Vodyany. The Ukrainians today, I think the general staff or the unit commander from the area has come out today and said the Russians do not control Vodyany. Now, that could be a bit of PR, an attempt to control the narrative around here. If Andrew Perpetua has that fully under Russian control, I'd trust that quite a bit. But it could be that Ukrainians haven't given up on fighting for Vodyany. It is important because it means that if they still can keep the fight here, it stops Vuhledar and the mines here from being flanked and encircled. And you don't really want to create a pocket here because essentially, that's that. So it is important, I think, that the Ukrainians try and hold on to Vodyany and keep the Russians at bay there. But it might be this sort of writing on the wall for this whole corner of the front line if the Russians do take Vodyany, because this is that high ground that's similarly high to Vuhledar. Down here, it's lower ground. Remember, if you look on my map down the right-hand side around here, it gives you the height. So wherever the cursor is, so Pavlivka, if you look there, it's 155 meters. And you go up to Vuhledar, it is 181 meters. So it's got about a 30 meter, it's 192, 30, 40 meter height advantage here. And that means it looks down on all of this here area where the Ukrainians were able to use anti-tank guided missiles to shoot equipment all the way down here from the large apartment blocks in Vuhledar. The Ukrainians have been holed up there for a long time. The Russians tried to hit it initially with a lot of artillery, didn't really do enough damage to the buildings. Then they started hammering it with guided glide bombs, and that did a lot more damage to the buildings, but they have managed to hold on to that quite successfully. The Russians have lost inordinate amounts of equipment trying to attack it from the south. They tried that a number of times with naval infantry brigades, 155th and 44th, I think, something like that. 40th, I forget. Anyway, they lost over 100 pieces of combat equipment and have now more recently decided it's a better idea to come from the high ground. So if you look here, that's 166, 170, 178, so on and so forth, 170. So it's broadly on, if they come along this road, they'll find it easier. It's not fighting uphill so much. So anyway, that's the story of what's going on there. When we look to sources concerning the Vuhledar direction, here's one where the Ukrainian forces repelled an attack by the Russian assault motorcycle group in the northern part of Pavlivka. So we have a lot of motorcycles being used in this neck of the woods to assault the Ukrainians and not getting particularly far in this case. So that's Pavlivka. So these motorcycles are trying to attack uphill there and get away without being hammered. Like I said to you before, if you are using say a convoy of 5 infantry fighting vehicles, they're quite large targets. You can hit them with anti-tank guided missiles, and if you stop one of the vehicles, then that's stopping maybe 10, 15, sometimes we see 20 people packed into those. Whereas if you have a whole host of motorcycles, it's much more difficult to hit and take out. You get 20 people on motorcycles, you need 20 bits of ordnance to take them out. Whereas with an infantry fighting vehicle, just one decent hit on that and bang, it goes up. So these motorcycles can be fairly useful in some with some attacks, so it just depends how you're going to use them. Anyway, that's enough from me, enough waffling from me. Take care, guys. I really appreciate your support, and I'll be back with you fairly soon. Just to let you know that on my ATP Distilled website, and I don't usually do spamming like this, but Benny's put such a great amount of effort into this. It's got a merchant support page, so if you want to help out the channel, there's all that kind of stuff, and all my books. So if you want to read about a pandemic, a dystopian future, you can get my Metamorphosis, Survival of the Fittest Metamorphosis, and Survival of the Fittest Adaptation. Those books, Curse of the Maya, Grease Lightning, Family Book, A Word of the Day for a year, every year forever, or Twins, A Survival Guide for Dads. Those are my sort of Johnny Pierce books, and if you're interested in my Jonathan M.S. Pierce books, philosophy and philosophy of religion and morality and whatever, loads of books there that you can have a look at, and you can purchase them if you so desire, and I will be fully appreciative of that. Lots of books there for your delectation. Anyway, thank you for Ben, who has put that together, and all of these. There's even a special books tab there as well. Expand your mind with Jonathan's books. Yeah, definitely. Anyway, take care, guys. Speak soon.